Those incarcerated in Ontario's prisons are, by definition, out of sight and so, for many, out of mind. But from last year's hunger strikes and labor disruptions to revelations about Adam Capay, a prisoner held for more than 1,500 days in solitary confinement, there is much that goes on behind bars for the rest of us to keep an eye on. Joining us now to do just that, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Geraldine Malone, Journalism Fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs. Here in studio, Catherine Latimer, Executive Director of the John Howard Society of Canada. Monty Wieselmeyer, Chair of the Corrections Division of OPSU, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union, and Lee Chappell, the President of Canadian Prison Consulting. And it's good to welcome you three here in our studio in Toronto. Geraldine, nice to have you on the line from Winnipeg, Manitoba for this discussion. I want to start, first of all, just before we put this graphic up with some information. We are having this discussion this evening on TVO because immediately after our conversation is over, we're going to have a documentary in which Lee figures prominently. It's called How to Prepare for Prison. And it is a, if I may say, terrific documentary about a subject that I suspect a lot of people don't think that much about. So we're going to hopefully add to the public's knowledge on this. Sheldon, let's bring these graphics up to start us out with. From the annual report of the Office of the Correctional Investigator from 2015 to 16, there are 14,000 plus inmates in this country, the average daily count. The average annual cost of incarcerating a male inmate is north of $100,000, and for women, it's actually twice as much. There are 1 in 4 inmates that are Indigenous in this country. About a third of female inmates are also Indigenous. 1 in 4 inmates are over the age of 50. 1 in 5 are serving a life sentence. And more than half of all women inmates have an identified mental health need, as compared to about a quarter of male inmates. That's the state of play today. Lee, get us started here. Compared to, say, 20 years ago, is it better or worse today?
It's far worse.
Far worse?
Yeah.
How come?
Well, there's a cumulative effect that would go back to a transition in Ontario. We're talking federally or provincial?
Well, you tell me. What's your? I mean, you have experience in both.
In Ontario provincial corrections, there was a considerable changeover in the late 90s, early 2000, where our government of the day was looking to privatize corrections, provincial corrections. We built super jails, closed many of the existing structures at that time. One of our jails, provincial jails, Penetanguishene in Central North, was privatized for a 5-year contract. There was a lot of opposition to the privatization, and I believe rightly so, but it was modeled after the American 90s boom of prison, control as an industry.
But what makes conditions worse?
The infrastructure. We've moved from what was an effective rehabilitative system that had a variety of institutions that had work programs. Guelph had a beef factory. Birch Rapids, there was essentially a minimum security for provincial sentenced inmates. Now everybody is centralized and housed in purely containment-based infrastructure.
Geraldine, let me bring you in. I'd like to know what factors have led to such disproportionate numbers of Aboriginal women being in jail.
There's a lot of different systemic reasons that have led to that, but one of the main ones that we've seen is a change in our federal law in how we deal with people when they're being actually sentenced. The power has left the judge's hand to kind of use his discretion as to whether someone maybe could serve a conditional sentence, serve it in the community, stay with their family. And now it's become something where they're automatically going into longer, harsher sentences. And this specifically disproportionately impacts women because a lot of times prior, the judges would know that they played a stronger role in their family and in their community and would then choose the conditional sentencing where they could actually go out the sentence within the community. So that's specifically impacted Indigenous women. And it's also over the past 10 years across the country, there's been a lot of shutting down of women's services for domestic violence, for help with their families. And you've seen a lot of impact from that in the women's population for incarcerated Indigenous women.
Do you have any idea as well why it would be twice as expensive to incarcerate a woman as opposed to a man?
That's largely attached to the fact that there are less women, but they are expected to have the same resources as the men's prison. So it just costs a lot more in that way. And it's just the population differences. Usually that's what the correctional investigator, as well as Corrections Services Canada, says for that number.
Okay. Monty, help us with this one. Again, say looking back over the last couple of decades, the role of a corrections officer, has that changed over that period of time?
Absolutely.
How so?
Well, first, I just want to say the numbers you reported were specific to federal corrections and didn't actually reflect provincial corrections. So in the province of Ontario, on any given day, we have about 8,500 to 9,000 inmates in our custody. But what has changed, as Lee said, we see these new mega jails. We've become more about warehousing as opposed to about rehabilitation. We had programs, and the government of the day did cut a lot of programs because basically a cheaper cost, and that's how they sold it to the public. So that makes it more difficult for the frontline worker, where now we're not about rehabilitation. We're focusing on basically get you to court, make sure you're fed, make sure you're safe if we possibly can. And we're not focusing on basically how we can improve the system. Again, there's been changes in the Mental Health Act that we saw in the 90s. So now we've become the last resort where we're dealing with a huge influx of mental health issues and addictions issues that we never dealt with in the past. So as a frontline correctional officer or a frontline correctional worker, we have to deal with these issues that we never dealt with in the past. So that's been a very significant change in the past 20
Is the
years.
life of a correctional officer more dangerous today than it would have been 20 years ago?
Yes, absolutely it is.
For what cause?
We're seeing an increase in the assaults on our staff. There's also increases on inmate violence. With the mental health issues, and usually it's not just because of the mental health issues, but a variety of issues, including overcrowding and so on. These issues, when you open a door, those frustrations, they're directed at the frontline staff. The frontline staff aren't prepared properly. We don't have the training that I think is required for us to have to deal with some of the issues that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. But we have to deal with the government of the day and what their objectives are, and that may not meet the objectives that we see in the jails and the correctional facilities.
Catherine, let me get you in on this issue. When inmates think that things are bad in prison, that they've crossed the line, I mean, prison's not supposed to be a fun place anyway, but if they think they're being mistreated, or if they feel they need to make a complaint about how something is going, how forthcoming are they in that regard?
I think it really depends. I mean, one of the things that we've noticed in the federal corrections system is that the grievance procedure, which is a very important mechanism for prisoners to be able to put forward their concerns, is really extremely dysfunctional. It takes a very long time for these grievances to be addressed. And they have to complete the grievance process before they can take external legal action. So it really curbs their ability to seek legal redress for often unlawful behavior or other problems within the prison system. In the federal system, there's also the option of contacting the correctional investigator. Many of the prisoners hesitate to do that.
Why?
That's a good question. I was just talking to a bunch of men in segregation and asked them if they'd raised concerns with the correctional investigator, and one of them argued that it was sort of like talking to CSC, wasn't it? And the other ones have some level of frustration about the extent to which the recommendations made by the correctional investigator actually generate change. And they will say, look, he doesn't have any authority. So you will see prisoners who have made complaints that they're not getting access, for example, to legal materials. Correctional investigator's office will investigate and find, yes, that's true, you are not getting access to the type of legal materials you should have. We will notify the warden. So they notify the warden, and the prisoner still doesn't get access to the legal materials. So they kind of shrug and say, well, what was the point of that?
Because of Adam Capay's situation, we, I think, have heard lately a lot more about segregation and about what that's all about over the last, say, month or two than we have probably in the last 10 years. Sheldon, again, let's put some numbers up on this because we want to share these figures. The number of offenders, this is in federal correctional institutions right now in the country, 366 in segregation. Almost a third are Aboriginal. 5 of 7 women in segregation are Aboriginal. Half are classified as maximum security. Again, almost a third of offenders in segregation are located in the Prairie region. And since 2013-14, there's been a 16% drop in the number of admissions to segregation. Let's understand more about what segregation is. Monty, what's it used for?
Well, you're speaking, again, those numbers are federally.
Federal.
And Adam Capay is in our provincial system.
Yes.
Segregation is used for a variety of things. Disciplinary if inmates are, if they're fighting or if they're acting out and not following the rules of the institution, potentially segregation would be one of those things to correct that behavior. But also it's used in our system now for administrative reasons. Maybe an offender you see on the front page of the Toronto Sun and the Toronto Star is a high profile, and for his own safety, maybe they need to be put in segregation where they won't potentially become a victim within our system.
Lee,
other one, sorry.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say, Lee, if somebody ends up in segregation because the idea is we need you to improve your behavior and therefore we're punishing you, generally speaking, how often does that work?
It can be effective, and I can look back 20, 30 years ago, similarly to what you broached earlier, and say that it was more effective then. Administrative segregation did not occur as often or rarely 20 or 30 years ago. What I would say for most people who are not familiar, it's a jail within a jail. I would never advocate for this to be abolished. I believe it's an important tool that is required for consequences. And again, as Monty said, for a fight or for contraband or for various infractions, this is a very clear consequence for inmates. However, where we've really fallen into an issue here is with the administrative segregation. And this classification can apply for a variety of reasons. Somebody's afraid, doesn't want to be in mainstream population, signs on for that. Other issues, compatibility issues, mental health issues. Sadly, again, the forensic hospitals were shut down in the 90s. Monty referred to that. A lot of these people are very frustrated and in decompensated states. There is not access to treatment or programming available. Certainly more so in provincial. It's minimal, non-existent. In federal, there is more resources for that.
While you're on that, what's the difference between federal or provincial segregation?
Well, there's a considerable difference. I mean, provincial system for one, I mean, the few things to clarify is provincial is always the entry point for any inmate. Anybody who ends up in federal begins in a provincial setting. That's where people are held while they're going through trial. It's only for people who are serving 2 years less a day or under. Federal system is a longer sentence. It's a transient nature in the provincial system, so there's a lot of people coming and going. Federal system is more static and I think more developed. There's more of a vested interest in the federal system. It allows for it to work more effectively. As a result, there's jobs, there's movement, there's a variety of things. You can access healthcare without a correctional officer. But
Catherine, let me try this with you. I'm going to ask you to do a vast generalization here, but at what point when you're in segregation would the average prisoner start to experience mental health issues?
I think it very much depends on the atmosphere surrounding the person's placement in segregation. We notice, for example, in the federal side, there's disciplinary segregation and then there's different types of administrative segregation. Lee mentioned people who are voluntarily in segregation. That's only about 20% of those that are in administrative segregation. They can do a little bit better because the atmosphere around their confinement tends to be fairly supportive. But if there's an atmosphere of harm, it doesn't take very long for people to have significant psychological and psychiatric implications for that. I can give you examples of a young man who really became suicidal within the first 5 days of his placement. But he came in and was subjected to some very harsh treatment because he had spit on a guard, and so his treatment reflected the extent to which the guards were angry with him for his assaultive behavior. And
what city did this happen in?
This happened in Kingston. It was in one of the maximum
Kingston?
facilities, yes.
Okay. And what happened to him?
He was, first of all, he didn't get any of the things that he's entitled to have, like a mattress and sheets and all this kind of stuff. So he was angry, and so he blocked his window, which is a very typical thing for men to do when they feel they have a legitimate grievance. They came with force, and they just sprayed pepper spray into his cell, and quite a bit of pepper spray, and he was having difficulty breathing, and pepper spray will affect your bronchial capacity. And he said, I need to be decontaminated, I can't breathe. And they said, too bad, basically. And so he broke the water system so that the sprinkler came down and just doused him. And he basically was left in a totally wet cell for about 2 or 3 days. And he saw his parole officer come down, and he said, I've got a razor blade. I'm going to slash myself if I don't get a shower, if I don't get, and she said, give me the razor blade, and he did. And subsequently, he said to the guards that he had reached a low point and he was going to commit suicide unless, and they said, well, go ahead. That would be one less person for us to look after.
And what happened?
His parole officer came down and said it would be a good idea if he apologized for having spit at the guard at his 5-day review. He did that, and they released him from segregation. But
Okay.
he had taken a pretty swift decline because of the conditions of his confinement.
Geraldine, as I suggested a moment ago, we're talking more about this lately, I think, because of Adam Capay's case. Could you, just for those who haven't been following it, tell us who he is and why he ended up in segregation?
Well, Adam Capay, he initially was in for minor charges, but while being housed in the Thunder Bay Correctional Center, there was an altercation and he was charged with first-degree murder, and that's how he actually ended up getting transferred over to the jail. In the jail, he was put in segregation, so 23 hours a day, plexiglass cell with lights. And it wasn't until Renew went through and was shown him that we actually got a bit of knowledge about what he had been going through. For over 1,500 days, he had been in administrative segregation, which I think is an important part to describe, is that he wasn't in segregation for the charge of first-degree murder. He was in segregation, and we don't know for sure what the reasoning behind it was, because we haven't been able to get a hold of all the paperwork that allowed him to stay in for so long. But it would have been either for his safety or for the institution's safety, or to conduct an investigation, and being that the altercation had happened at a different institution, the last one doesn't really make sense.
Interestingly enough, his case has become very public and very political. Interestingly enough, even the Conservatives at Queen's Park have gone to bat for this guy, seeing that his treatment has been substandard. Does anybody know why he has been treated the way he has?
I don't think anyone knows specifically in that case. You're just seeing administrative segregation in both the provincial and the federal correction kind of become the go-to model for having to deal with prisoners. And a lot of it has been mentioned by other panelists today, where you're talking about warehousing, you're talking about a lack of mental health services. And when all of these things get combined in an institution, it can become really difficult to handle. And the problem now is that we're resulting with administrative segregation. We're going there first, rather than it being a last case scenario. So it's really across the country. There are hundreds of Adams across the country right now in segregation and long-term segregation. Where I'm at in Manitoba, they actually say that it's probably the highest rate of segregation in our provincial prisons, and it's followed quickly after by Saskatchewan. In the prairies, we have very bad rates of segregation, and it's just a situation where you are having so many prisoners that guards are unable to deal with it. And these aren't just regular, it's a lot of people think that everyone committed the crime, do your time, but a lot of these people have complex mental health needs, and those are also falling on our provincial and federal corrections system to deal with all of these things.
Lee, let's do a little bio here. You're not here because your expertise was acquired in some university. You are here because how many prison institutions have you been in during the course of your life?
Boy, that's a great question. Numerous, more than, I would say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 15 institutions covering a 25-year span.
So you know the lay of the land pretty well.
I do.
Have you been in segregation?
I have.
What's the longest chunk of time?
My longest chunk was 3 or 4 months straight, and I'd say cumulatively throughout my life, I've spent approximately 2 years of my life in solitary.
What did that do to you?
It has a profound effect. I was young for the most part throughout most of this. I was full of vinegar at that point a little bit. I was determined to not allow that to throw me off. I would pace, I would do a lot of push-ups, I would do everything I could to try to maintain and understand that this would come to an end, that there would be a day when this would end. And I just constantly battled with myself. But I'd also find myself rocking in my bed and trying to find a way of just having some sort of comfort derived from touch or And that I would say that you just go through phases where you become day, night blurs together, it doesn't matter.
When you found yourself in segregation, did you feel at the time, yeah, I kind of deserve to be here?
No. Well, let me qualify that. There were occasions where, yes, I did believe that, and there were certainly occasions where, no, I did not. There was a time in 1990 in Millhaven, maximum security, where I had been found to have a still in my cell for making moonshine. And typically that's a 7 or 10 day sentence. Now, Millhaven was going through a retrofitting period at the time, changing from a predominantly mainstream population institution to a reception center, and my cell was taken away and there was nowhere to return to. So I spent the duration of my sentence, the last 3 or 4 months, in solitary and was released directly to the street. And what I can say is the day that I came out, I was absolutely dizzy and my sensory overload of, I was anxious on the train, I was terrified, and I ran away. And that led to more crimes and not adhering to my parole. And I can just say it's a recipe that would not be success, and it's not one that would ever be one that we would look at as for public safety.
Well, I guess, I mean, I'm not asking you to invade your privacy, and forgive me if I have, but
Right.
I think we want, based on your experience, to have some better understanding of Adam Capay's situation, given that he's been in segregation for months now. What's that doing to him?
Well, for 1,500 days, according to but what I mean, I can only imagine that this is taking a real toll. What I will say about Adam Capay, I think this points to a larger issue than corrections. Typically, in a federal system, when there's an alleged murder of an inmate to inmate, the protocol is to keep the person who is charged with that offense in solitary to ride out the trial, and this is very common in Canada. Now, for this to have taken 4 years, I don't understand that. I think that's a little bit of a weigh-in on what's happening with our justice system, why it would take that long to occur. I understand from a prison administrator's perspective, if this person is charged with murdering another inmate, there's a concern there, obviously, I think, for the safety of others, and he doesn't play well with others. For it to have been 4 years, this is just a travesty.
In which case, okay, Monty, help us with this part of it. The Ontario government has recently appointed Howard Sapers, who's the federal prisons watchdog, to be their sort of chief independent advisor on corrections policy. What do you think his top priority ought to be?
His top priority?
Yeah.
Well, he's going to be bringing in experience from the federal system, so he'll have to learn our provincial system, and there's different challenges. I think his role will probably turn into a more permanent role, because I don't see him leaving a full-time job coming to Ontario for a short term. So our ombudsman regularly deals with about 4,000 complaints every year, so I could see him taking that on. Again, the Ontario government's tasked him with overseeing the segregation issues within the province of Ontario. So that'll be his initial role. There's a bunch of other challenges. I would say the mental health issues that we're dealing with and how they're brought into our system, and also within segregation, is a huge thing. If we can battle that issue, that would probably serve us well and improve a lot of the conditions that we deal with. So I would direct him more in that way than specifically just focusing on segregation.
Catherine, what do you think his top priority should be as he investigates the Ontario situation?
I think he needs to deal with the administrative segregation issues. Yeah, there are numerous people who are being detained long-term in segregation cells in provincial institutions, and they're often transferred immediately into segregation cells in the federal system with the clock re-beginning, so that people are not aware of the total length of time that people have spent in administrative segregation. But I know in the Ottawa Carleton Detention Centre, one of the prisoners that I deal with now in the federal system was in administrative segregation for 4 years as well. And he was a self-harmer, which is another, John Howard believes that those with serious mental health issues and a tendency to self-harm shouldn't be placed in administrative segregation. But this gentleman was placed in administrative segregation in the federal system, and within hours he was banging his head against the wall until he fell unconscious, and they had to take him to the hospital with serious head injuries. So it's a very serious problem in the provincial institutions.
Monty, would your corrections officers, whom you represent, would they have a problem with putting limits on segregation?
Well, again, the government came out with an announcement. I think we're seeing this trend not only across the world, but tying into the UN model of 15 days. What the province announced was 15 days in regards to disciplinary segregation. Right now in the province of Ontario, it was reported by reporter, that's only about 8.6% of our admissions to segregation. So you have another 90-some% that aren't being addressed, which is the administrative aspect. So again, putting 15 days doesn't really solve a problem. It just seems to be a political football to punt around right now.
I want to, Sheldon, should we bring these pictures up now? Let's do this. We're going to get into some, in our remaining moments here, some discussion about what prison is actually for. And we're showing you pictures of a high security prison in Norway. Let's just flip these over because I think we've got a few of them here. This is described as the world's most humane prison. And this is a high security prison. This is not for people who stole a loaf of bread from a corner store. This is for tough criminals. And it looks, as you can see, very humane and actually quite nice. The question is, Geraldine, let's start with you on this. Is this something that we should be doing here in Canada?
Yeah, you have to think about what your priorities are. And up until about 10 years ago in Canada's federal corrections, it was really about rehabilitation. So it was recognizing that a lot of inmates would be coming back out into society after. That is the goal of corrections. And now it's really gotten to a point of retribution. And I think that that's a concern. And you're seeing the difference from the prison standpoint where, we have reduced access to prison farms, we've reduced access to services, and inmates are acting out. A woman that I spoke with recently, she told me she spent a lot of her stay in segregation in British Columbia when she was there in the federal system. And she said that one of the reasons was she knew she was going to end up in seg, so she would act out, she would trash her room, she would do those things. So she would end up for a 40-day stay in seg, a 20-day stay in seg. And so it's something where we need to really look at, do we want to reduce recidivism? Do we want to bring people out of prison and have them becoming, active members in our society? Or do we want to just continue this cycle of incarceration?
Lee, let me get your view on that. And I think it's pretty clear that when Stephen Harper's government was in power in Ottawa, there was a different focus. It was about victims' rights and it was about punishing criminals. The initial suggestions out of Justin Trudeau's government are we want a fact-based approach. If punishing if punishing ought to be the prime goal of prisons, let the facts show it. If it isn't, and rehabilitation is where it's at, well, let's follow that path. Which do you believe is the way to go?
Well, I agree. I mean, we can go two different ways. Do we want people to simply suffer for whatever brought them to that incarceration, or do we want to work towards reforming behavior?
Can prisons reform behavior?
Well, I think there's certainly an ability. I mean, we need to, I believe, for one, through all these things, accumulatively, through the 10 years of the tough on crime regime, through the infrastructure changes in Ontario, so federally, provincially, in Ontario and federally, I'd say at this point, frontliners are hard-pressed to have any belief in rehabilitation. It's very difficult for any government of the day now but ultimately, yes, it's a huge investment financially. And I think, Canadians typically have a lot of compassion and understanding. I think this is a non-transparent social entity that's come to a point where the culture is just really pervasively entrenched with dehumanization and intimidation with our inmates. And we've lost sight of the ability to, and the belief of rehabilitation. I feel we need to rally the troops. Like Monty, for example, with his group, there's been a lot of divisions long-term, a lot of work to rule, a lot of dissatisfaction with the employer. The same is true of the federal frontliners. And I think it's time if we can rally the troops and say, yes, you do play an important role in public safety, and yes, this is an important thing, and let's move towards rehabilitation. Let's reform behavior. We can change hardwiring. I served 25 years. If I can do it, anybody can. I'm 49.
You're 49. You've spent more than half your life in jail.
I did, and I was a crossover kid. I started in the foster system. I was, a throwaway, adopted, throwaway, all that stuff, and that, so it was a crossover from foster care to criminalization and all that stuff. And ultimately, all I know is if I've been able to do so, turn the corner, And there's been a lot of good people who played a role in that. People who worked within our prisons, help that I received in the 80s and 90s when we were running with rehabilitation and causality being the root form. So when we're looking at just, this ideology that we can beat this out of people and break people is not going to work.
Well, let me ask Catherine about that. Obviously, I know for the John Howard Society, we know where you're coming from on this issue, but there are obviously a significant number of Canadians who don't believe that criminals can be rehabilitated and that jail ought to be about punishment and vengeance. Why are they wrong?
Well, prison is, people are sent there as punishment, not for punishment. So they're experiencing a denial of liberties, which is the response to the criminal behavior. We then got an opportunity to work with them and give them the skill set so that they have an opportunity to make choices once they're released from the prison. Most of them are coming out. And if we continue to be harsh and create an atmosphere that the tough guy is going to win, we're not going to create a value structure or a willingness or an atmosphere where people are going to want to make the same choices that Lee made about reforming their behavior. And we believe all are capable, given an opportunity of changing their behavior. And it's in the communities.
All are capable? All are capable?
Well, yes, given time and aging and all kinds of things, yes.
Paul Bernardo?
Well, Paul Bernardo, I guarantee you, has changed since his original sentence, but whether or not he would be safe in the community is a different issue. But all of them have an opportunity to make a contribution, whether that contribution is being made from behind bars or whether it's being made in the community, depending on the amount of public safety issues that are at stake. The more we should be trying not to warehouse these people, but to use it as an opportunity to get the best out of people.
Monty, vast majority, Steve. I would say, and I do respect Catherine's position at all, but I would venture the vast majority have the potential to do it.
Have the potential.
I wouldn't say all.
Monty, in our last minute here, let's go to the flip side on that, which is, I think the two words that sum up corrections policy are sentences end, right? For 99% of Canadians who go behind bars, sentences end. So what kind of person do we want coming out after it's all said and done? How would you weigh in on that?
I absolutely agree, and I say that quite often to the media, that 99%, they're going to become your neighbors, they're your family members, so on. And we want them to come back into our communities. And I think our frontline staff, if they can have an opportunity to be a part of that, and shown that there's a way to do that. But you need resources. And just, it's one thing to say, well, we're going to change the laws and we're going to change certain aspects, but you need to put resources. You need to put your money where your mouth is, basically.
Who needs to do that?
The government. Basically, you can say all kinds of things, and it may sound good whether at Queen's Park or if you're Parliament Hill in Ottawa, but if you're not willing to put basically the resources behind where you want things to go, things aren't going to go. You can't say, well, we want you to do more with less. It just doesn't work within a prison system. It's a people-oriented business. That's what it is.
Gotcha. I want to thank everybody for coming on this program and not only having this discussion, but helping to set up what will happen immediately after this program, How to Prepare for Prison, the documentary in which Lee plays such a prominent role. So Geraldine Malone, the Journalism Fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs, thanks for being there for us in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Lee Chappell, founder of Canadian Prison Consulting. Catherine Latimer, Executive Director of the John Howard Society of Canada. Monty Wieselmeyer, Chair of the Corrections Division of OPSU. Thanks so much, everybody.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.